Scott, don't know where you'd like to start, so you tell me, but I do have a clip I want to play from Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who apparently is very happy poking our bear, Mark Carney. Now, I don't know if you've heard this clip today.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I've seen the report, yep.
Okay, well, let me play this for our listeners. So this is the same Scott Bessent who the other day, after Donald Trump called Mark Carney, claimed that he was in the Oval Office and heard Mark Carney basically pulling back on everything he had said at Davos, suggesting he was, apologizing, I guess, for all intents and purposes to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, of course, since has said, no, they had a very constructive conversation, and no, Canada, he stands by what he said. Then today, Scott Bessent told CNBC this.
What about Canada? We've got a bit of a rift there lately, and there's different accounts between you and Prime Minister Mark Carney about that call this week, post-Davos, with President Trump. He says that he dug in and reinforced the message. You said that he walked it back.
I was on the call. Prime Minister Carney, in my investment career, I've seen what happens when a technocrat tries to pivot and become a politician. It never really works out well. So I would just encourage Prime Minister Carney to do what he thinks is best for the Canadian people, not his own virtue signaling, because we do have a USMCA negotiation coming up, and he rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump message, and that's not a great place to be when you're negotiating with an economy that is multiple larger than you are and your biggest trading partner. In the end, I think we will end up in a good place. It may not be a straight line.
Are you saying that they will face consequences in these trade negotiations, reopening the USMCA?
I am saying that I would not pick a fight going into USMCA to score some cheap political points. Either you are working for your own political career or you're working for the Canadian people.
Well, Scott, my reaction to that was to Scott Bessent. I said, bite me, but I'm curious to know what you make of that.
Yeah, I don't know if we're allowed to say peckerhead on the radio, but that's what that guy is. And if he thinks there's a distinction between Mark Carney's political interest and the national interest on this question, or if he thinks there's a distinction between popular opinion and where our negotiating interest lies, he's mistaken. And by the way, I noticed that he didn't double down on his version of events on that call. He backed off on that. He went to a threat. He didn't repeat his insistence. And I would also say, what does Scott Bessent know about being an elected politician? He's never run for elected office. When he talks about, we see what happens when a technocrat. Yeah. He literally says, I've been an investment banker all my life, and I've watched what happens when a technocrat enters politics. Well, you mean and reverses a 25-point deficit for his party and then becomes prime minister and then actually gives a speech on the world stage that the entire world, except for the United States, rallies around and says, yeah, that's exactly how we feel. So I think this guy is provoking enormous pressure on Carney. But the pressure on Carney is to restrain himself. It's to not say the insulting things that you and I just said, because there is unlimited appetite in Canada to tell this guy to take his hat and take a walk.
I would ask you where you think this comes from. Is this from the top down, Scott? Is this Donald Trump saying, yeah, go ahead and say this? Or he can't be doing this on his own.
Well, I don't think he does it on his own, but I think the way it works is that if you're a sniveling weakling, you don't care about the fact that you're being listened to by all of America and possibly all of the world. You care only that you're being listened to by the man who occupies the White House. So he says what he thinks Trump wants to hear. Trump wants to hear, ooh, Carney bad, Trump strong, America strong, Canada weak. So he says that, not because he thinks it's strategic, not because he thinks that it advances America's negotiating position, but because that's what he thinks the mad orange man who occupies the White House, chomping down on his overcooked steak and ketchup, wants to hear. So it's not quite like go out and say this, but I think this guy knows what the crazy man wants to hear, and he says it.
All right, let me move on from that and bring it back to what's going on right now in Ottawa. Parliament's back in session. It's been kind of fun the last couple of days to get caught up on the yelling and screaming. I thought Mark Miller had a great line at the block about, but I'm Carnival when he brought that up over what Carney had said in Quebec, so that was nice. But there's a new poll out today, and the news just gets, and maybe not surprisingly, gets better and better for the Liberals.
I have this friend he's English Anglophone, and he put this question to me earlier this week, and he said, explain the Abraham thing. Was it really that big a deal? Was it such a disaster? And I was like, well, you got to be very careful as an Anglophone leader, because I worked, for a prime minister who was thought of as a Quebecer, but was born in Ontario. And, you got to be careful playing on those raw nerves of nationalism in the province of Quebec. And then today he sent me a note and pointed at the poll and goes, I'm sorry. Carney is absolutely fleecing the bloc. So explain to me again how this speech was a disaster. I'll tell you another thing. I worked for a couple prime ministers, watched a lot of politics. It's very rare that a Canadian prime minister does something on the international stage that generates a political bump at home. Like, it just doesn't happen, right? Like, people were talking, what was the criticism of Davos? They were like, we might be punching the bear. But then the other criticism was, let's disconnect them from real people's real lives and all that kind of stuff. This thing resonated.
Yeah.
It's kind of rung the bell. And it reminds you that the exception to that rule about international venues is when you're at war. And I increasingly think that Canadians feel like it's an economic war, it's a trade war, but with the United States, it feels like a war. And therefore, Carney is getting a bump.
To your point, I was just thinking as you said that, Canada standing on the world stage, and people talked about this at the end of the Justin Trudeau era or campaign, suggesting that Canada kind of, we used to punch above our weight and then we started punching below our weight. And you think about Mark Carney making news in Davos. The last time a prime minister made news was perhaps when Justin Trudeau dressed up on that trip to India. So, we've gone from one extreme to the other. And I think for Mark Carney's position, I think Davos has convinced a lot of Canadians, because this poll came out after that trip, that he is the guy, which begs the question, Scott, does he take all this and say, hey, I'm in majority territory, let's go ahead and call an election early?
Well, what always screws up politicians is when they take political capital that's been awarded to them because people feel like you are acting in a serious way in the national interest, and that is what we applaud. And then they go, okay, well, now I'd like to crassly cash that in for my own personal political benefit. That's when people go, oh, man, God, you're just a politician like the others. I think the great brand for Carney is that he's serious. I do think it's very likely there'll be an election this year. I've said that before. I think it's even possible to be an election in the spring. But I think the trigger for an election will come in the shadow of the Davos speech, but not in the way that we might be talking about. Like, not like, okay, well, I'm just going to call an election because I like where the polls are. I think the scenario for an election in, the next, say like before June, is that Trump decides that his best negotiating stance on CUSMA is to cancel it. And it's a very Trumpy thing to do if you think about the art of the deal, right? He'll come out, he won't say this is our negotiating position. Instead, he'll just say, I'm giving notice that we're abrogating the free trade agreement, and then cause a panic. And then he thinks that'll mean that they'll scramble and they'll compromise on everything. I think at that point, Carney could say, you know what? I need a mandate. Like, we're at swords here,
right,
and I am going to call an election because I want to know what my crystal clear mandate is. This is my view. Poilievre can give his. Let's go. That, to me, is the scenario where Canadians will permit him to call an election. But if he just says, hey, I like the polls, I'm going to call an election, he could pay a price.
Interesting, huh? So Carney gets in because of Trump, and it would take another Trump, according to you, some action from Trump to get him to say, I'm going to call an election. Canadians would buy in just like they did the first time around. That's interesting take. Okay.
We've seen it, right? We've seen it. Like, during the election campaign, when Trump was bursting through the television screen and our phones, the polls rose for Carney.
Yeah, Sure.
When he faded, the polls rose for Poilievre. What's been bad about this past week for Poilievre? Everyone's talking about Trump,
Right.
and Carney's numbers rise.
Speaking of Poilievre, just really quickly, leadership review. People have been talking about that. What are you expecting to happen here?
Look, I'm a dummy, okay? Like, I'm like Captain Conventional Wisdom here, to the point where it's starting to scare me. Like, I assume that Poilievre has this thing in hand, that the delegates have been like, well, and all the votes have been well marshaled and all that kind of stuff. And so he'll commandingly get his endorsement from the party faithful, and he'll give a speech and he'll move forward. The only thing I would watch for is conventional wisdom wrong? Because sometimes it is. There must be some people out there in the Conservative Party who are saying, yeah, but this guy lost, and then he lost his riding, and now he looks like he's also behind in the polls, and he looks like he could lose another one. Like, is this exactly the bet we want to ride? So just a little part of me, like, the contrarian goes, should I bet on New England? I think Seattle's defense is really, really strong, but now I think maybe I'm overthinking it. The other thing is watch for floor crossers, because now would be the exact right time to snap that trap.
All right. Scott, before I let you go, we have a new feature we're running on my show. It is called What Donald Trump Meant to Say. And this one has to do with the trade deal. Of course, he threatened 100% tariffs, but this is what he meant to say.
I want to congratulate Prime Minister Carney for the trade deal he just made with China. It was a very smart move, because you know how I keep changing my mind when it comes to trade. Nice going, Prime Minister. Signed, Donald J. Trump.
There you go. So for those of us always hoping that we could hear that one day, there you go. Scott, thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Unmistakably Canadian.
It's the music that raised you.
The artists raising the bar.
Hi, this is Brian Adams.
Hey, my name's Brett Emmons. I'm from the Glorious Sons.
Hi, I'm Nelly Furtado.
Made in Canada. The station that champions Canadian music.
Loud, proud, and all yours.
No passports required. Just press play.
Tap into Made in Canada now on iHeartRadio.ca
or the free iHeartRadio app.